Welcome, everybody. My name is Brent Hoover. I am the Aiken area SBDC consultant, and today we're here to talk about starting your business with data protection. So the focus is on pre-venture businesses, but I'm hoping that you'll find plenty of insights from today's material. So with that said, let's get started, shall we? Now, we do have to give you a little bit of information about who we are at SBDC. So we stand for the South Carolina Small Business Development Center. So we are a government program. It is managed by the SBA. We get funding from all levels of government, federal, state, and local. And because of that, we're able to offer no-cost counseling that is confidential to you as a client. As long as you're a for-profit business that's going to be operating in some capacity here in South Carolina, we can help out. We can't give tax advice. We cannot give legal advice because we're not CPAs, we're not attorneys, but we can connect you with those professionals. Now, part of the other work that we do is what we're doing today, and that is the workshop element, educating you. And yes, as Carolyn said, this will be recorded, so if you ever want to go back and pick up any further insights, you certainly can. Now, in addition to our main counseling, we offer a variety of special programs. One of those is today's topic adjacent, and that's cybersecurity. But we have other things such as exporting, product development, and commercialization, etc., right? But once again, we wanted to let you know a little bit about who we are in case you're not a client yet. Therefore, let's go ahead and get started. So what are we going to accomplish today? Well, first thing I'm going to go for is the top level overview. This is a macro side. So in essence, we're talking about cybersecurity, but this is from the focus of a pre-venture business. Now, this is not a data dump for you, okay? We're going to talk about a lot of things through the next hour. I'm hoping to let you go a few minutes early too, but I plan to follow up with every business that has actually shown up here today for the presentation. Why? Because we're not just about throwing out this information. We want to see how you apply it. So my goal is, once after today, we're going to not only give you a copy of the presentation, I'll contact you one-on-one, and we'll find out how best we can actually help in these areas to see what you've implemented based off of today's session. Now, I'm sure you may be working with a primary counselor already. Here at SBDC, we do a lot of co-counseling. So most likely your primary counselor will be involved in this process as well. We love working together to help you as the client. But once again, I wanted to reiterate that we are going to follow up with you after this, directly one-on-one if you so choose. Why? Because it's actually about making sure this information is being applied. So many times I have pre-ventures come here, and it's great because I can actually make sure the foundations are put into place from the beginning, because it's easier to get the foundation right than try to go back later on. So think of this as almost the start of a New Year's resolution of how you're going to approach data protection. Now, you see my disclaimer down there. Things change. Well, we're going to talk about different pieces of technology, okay? So it's not just the descriptive factor. We're actually saying, okay, here's what you can implement either at a no-cost or a low-cost solution. Once again, the world of cybersecurity and data protection is always changing. My goal here is to make you less of a soft target, to have these things put in place from day one. Now, I also want to stress that I'm no cybersecurity expert. I manage the tech committee team for the SBDC. I serve on the America's SBDC Cybersecurity Task Force, but I wanted to reiterate that this is about basic cyber hygiene. There is no magic bullet. There is no bulletproof armor that's going to protect you from a hacker. But our goal is, once again, to make sure and minimize the risk that is put on you and your business. So what does the agenda look like? Well, we're going to start off with the self-audit. We'll work our way into updates. Yes, passphrases and the management of said passphrases. Getting into Malice Protection, going down to backups for twofold purpose there, and concluding with email protection. Like I said, we're going for a top-level overview, and once again, we're going to be able to get into a few things that go into each facility. Now, what about the startup checklist? I have this piece up here because the idea here is that cybersecurity is this final piece of the puzzle, okay? That you have to treat this as no different than any other step on the startup process, from getting your LLC created, to getting insurance, to registering with local government, to looking at any additional permitting that are industry specific as part of your due diligence, okay? So in essence, let's get this right. Now with the self-audit, I do open it with this first question, and that's, what information does your company need? Okay. When it comes to long information, we love having as much data as we can at our hand, right? Because we're able to see, okay, can we find any trends, etc. Well, the problem here is that information may have some value to it, but it also has a lot of substantial risk. Think of my first example down there. You bring somebody on as a laborer, whether they're a W-9 through a 1099 contractor, or in this case, they're a W-2 employee, and you file, in that case, a W-4. Later, you print the W-4 for you, and you file the W-2 and W-3 at the end of the year. Well, guess what? They have TIAs on them. They have social security numbers. They have EINs. All of these are sensitive information pieces. Well, you have to figure out, well, hey, how are we protecting that data at our company? So in these cases, we really want to actually go through and first do a self-audit as to what information we currently have and what information are we going to receive. And because of that, we want to see how that's going to be protected. Now, my former colleague, Earl Gregorich, who used to head up the SBDC Tech Committee team, he actually produced this self-audit worksheet. There's no cost to it. It's on our website. I provided the link right here. And what goes through is you can see everything from who's responsible for cybersecurity, what pieces of software do you have a firewall in place, what are you doing with backups, etc. All of these things we're going to discuss today in greater detail. But once again, I figured this is the first thing to start off with. So if you can, after this meeting, go ahead and pull this self-audit worksheet. But the first thing is really just evaluating, once again, what pieces of technology are we currently have, what are we going to have, and for those cases, we'll get into actually updating those processes. Now, I do want to make you aware of a little bit of the law. No, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving legal advice. But you should know here in South Carolina what governs the world of cybersecurity and data breaches. And that is 39-1-90. Feel free to go to it at your leisure. And you'll see that if you have possession of somebody's first and last name, and that is hacked and released potentially a bad actor, as they would say, in conjunction with something like their driver's license number or their social security number or anything relating to financial information, that puts your business on the hook. You can see what's being required of you to actually post of that breach and how you were going to respond. So once again, I want to stress, everyone treats the idea, it's like, well, it's probably not going to happen to me. That probability could be true. Otherwise, sometimes Murphy's Law does exist, and what can go wrong will go wrong. So I do want to make you aware of what's governing here with South Carolina from that of data protection. Now, with a self-audit, right, you're going through, you're seeing what you're in possession of and how you're going to protect that. Well, one of the easiest ways is actually going through updates. I stress this is not rocket science, okay? If you're operating on Windows, the best way to go through is actually having auto update. Now, if you see here, I also have included schedule correctly. Reason being, as I've heard of some businesses that are like, I'll actually schedule it for 2 a.m. because I'm not going to be working then. Well, if your machine's not on, it may not actually properly download and install that update. Now, this isn't, once again, rocket science. You can schedule it for whatever you would like. But here's the thing. When those updates are coming on, you'd rather have them auto set for updates. Now, what if your operating system no longer accommodates an update in that case? We have seen that occasionally, particularly those on Macintosh. Because, if you get an older machine, they want you to buy the new model. Well, if you're not allowed to update the operating system anymore, that's putting you in a vulnerable state. But once again, this is what it's going to look like when you go into Windows Update for that of a PC. Now, if you actually purchase a new PC, particularly, you may notice there's quite a few applications come along with that. Because your company's purchased, it's like, hey, we got this asset on the company books. We have a lot of things that we're not going to use. Well, number one, you could remove those things to improve some of the storage and speed of your machine, but also two, any of those could theoretically be a potential liability, okay? If you are not going to update each and every application on your machine, get rid of it if it's not needed for the business. That's one of the things we always recommend with any new machine coming through. What do you need to actually do commerce for your company? If it's something that's superfluous, once again, either you're going to have to update it, which is going to be extra time on your hand, or you can simply get rid of that program from your operating system. Now, if you're on a Mac, this is what it's going to look like. I took the screenshot from actually a Mac of my own. You're going to go into General. You're going to click Software Update. Now, here's something if your business is going to operate on the Mac, just because you have it set for auto update. It usually will do quite well with auto updating programs in the background. However, sometimes, even with the auto update, it may not register the operating system update for a couple of days. I've noticed that with my own Macintosh. So just because you got it set to auto update, it's good to go through every couple of days and make sure that's still following as noticed. But the programs themselves operate and update pretty quickly and as effectively as they can on the Macintosh. Once again, this is not rocket science, but it's getting this as much of an automated process as we can on the updates. One of the best things we can do from protecting a cybersecurity is making sure that there are no vulnerabilities that are common out there among operating systems. Okay. Now, what about the passphrase management? Well, what's a good passphrase to begin with? Notice I use the term passphrase and not password. I mean, it used to be some people would have their password as password or password one. That's not a great strategy in today's world. Why it's so easy to hack on that case. Now, what are you going to actually do to managing that? Well, a lot of individuals will most likely use a simpler route. They may actually use a browser that automatically generates a secure password. In this case, that passphrase is probably going to be over 16 characters, a mixture of uppercase and lowercase and digits and special characters, etc. And that's pretty good from actually a passphrase management perspective. It's having something that is long with the number of strings involved with it, but also too, you're updating it and changing it, say every 3 to 6 months, and you're not reusing passphrases. But the problem is you can have so many different platforms you need to store passphrases on, and how do you actually manage all that? Well, like I said, some people end up using browsers. Some in like with Macintosh, it stores it overall on the Apple system. However, you may actually want to go a further step, and that's actually with a true dedicated passphrase manager. Now, I put 3 options down here. These are not the 3 that we're saying, oh my gosh, they're the best out there. But I tried to go with options that were low cost. I looked at a lot of different sites to see what are some of the best reviews for 2024. And you would notice we got Bitwarden, we got Dashlane, we got Keeper. Now, after the presentation, each of these will have links built into them. Now, for what they offer on the personal side, you can get Passphrase Manager for free through these various options. For a business perspective, they are going to start charging you. Typically, there is a per user charge. Now, some of these may actually have a minimum where it's like you have the lower cost, say like $3 per user, but you may end up having to have 10 or 5 users minimum in order to get that price. The reason I had Bitwarden is it's seen as one of the most popular out there. You've probably heard of others as well, but you've also probably looked at the news and seen that some of them have been hacked throughout the duration, right, of dealing with cybersecurity. And inevitably, that's going to happen with most things out there. Nothing is fully secure. But this does give you a way of actually managing your passphrases in a centralized element, where essentially you have one passphrase that you remember, and you'll have a recovery key that goes along with it. Now, understand if you utilize one of these systems and you forget your recovery key and you don't know the passphrase, the master passphrase for that, you are probably going to be in severe trouble with all of the accounts that you're trying to get logged into. But I wanted to stress, these are simply some of the options out there. Once again, they do add up over time. And especially if you end up on like, 10 different employees, you're paying this per month. And let's say it's $5 per user, paying $50 per month in that element of a larger company. So some businesses may say, well, I can't necessarily afford that. You've got to start thinking about cybersecurity from the beginnings of startup. And the thing is a budget item. Because with data protection here, it is one of those things, unfortunately, hackers are always trying to get more creative, and therefore there's a little bit of nickeling and diming that comes to this. Now, on the personal side, you'll find the option for passphrase management here. And like I said, some people end up using the operating system itself to store that, like a Macintosh. It's about what you feel most comfortable with and also, too, what you can afford. Now, I've noticed in terms of some of the pricing, like Keeper has some good prices on that, but you need to be careful going through on just the lowest option. You need to actually look at the finer details, because an example of that is they have a really good price on the basic package, but the basic package does not have 2-factor authentication built into it. And that is something that I cannot stress enough. And that is acting as an extra layer of security. In today's world of 2024, if something doesn't have at the minimum of 2-factor authentication, it's putting us at a vulnerability right there, because all someone needs to do is get the password or the passphrase, and they can log in. 2-factor authentication just goes the next step. Most likely it's going to call your phone or send a text message to your phone or to your email with a specific code. The next step gets into like 3-factor authentication. And sometimes this has been involving with biometrics, and there's been some debate about that, not only from the privacy element too, but in some cases where people are using AI in that case to also beat the system, or even simply a picture of the person's face in order to get around that. Now, there have been mixed results on that, but once again, it's just putting an extra step in place. Here's the thing. Anytime you set up an account with a new platform or a piece of software, you need to go in and actually figure out, how do I set up the multi-factor authentication? Whether that's 2-factor, whether that's 3-factor, etc. Every platform out there probably is going to have some option. And if the platform doesn't have that option, you really need to consider, should you be using that platform if you're dealing with secure information of some capacity. So once again, I use this as the addendum to the element of passphrases. Let's just add another layer of security. It's not costing you anything, most likely, in order to set this up on a manual basis. If you want it automated through some of the passphrases, you may end up having to pay a little bit on the higher of subscription just to have that built in as default. Now, some of that can have some challenges, how shall we say. I have been reading on some of the passphrase management systems that when it deals with auto generation, your browser may also want to auto generate one. So it's coming into some contention. So you want to make sure that the right one is being stored. Okay. But some browsers are now allowing you to import from that. And particularly in that case, when we look on that slide, like one of DuckDuckGo, it's a search engine that's come, been around. It's very much valuing privacy. They put out their own new browser. It's involving a lot of updates recently, but they've been focused on privacy and security. And they have one that's built in for that case with Bitwarden to actually pull from the passphrase management. Now, once again, it's about finding what's the best option for you from your comfort level and your price. But once again, this is not rocket science. It's just about putting nice layers of additional security in place so you can sleep a little bit better at night. Now, here's something I do recommend as you're going through today's webinar. If you're ever curious about passphrase, the breaches, you can actually check that. HaveIBeenPwned.com is just a fun free tool that you can actually input any email address that you'd like, and it will tell you the potential breaches that have been involved with. If you really want to deep dive, they want you to go for a paid subscription. But if you just want to do a simple free check, you can actually see, based on that, of the large breaches that have occurred with various companies. So it's one of those things I do encourage, as you're going through this webinar here, check it out. As I mentioned with passphrase, if you're not going to use a manager, you want to be making sure that, say it's like 12 to 16 characters in that, you're not reusing. You, in this case, are updating it, say, every 3 to 6 months. In some cases, some companies are trying to move away entirely from passphrases and go with a complete biometric system. Once again, a lot of sites are still using passphrase elements. So that's what we're going to talk about mainly from here, because I'm trying to keep this as bare bones as simple. And then we can go into further detail on a one-on-one basis if you so choose. Now, what about the Malice Protection? Well, once again, we got the Windows side, and that's actually with Windows Defender. If you're looking from the antivirus and also protecting against ransomware and looking at malware, if you're looking for simple tool that's already installed on your PC, it is the Windows Defender. We use them here with our own PCs, and actually Windows Defender is not too bad of a system. It was designed by Microsoft for that case to have essentially a built-in antivirus system. Now, if you want to look at third party, once again, people say, I don't think that's enough for my business. I may want to go a next step. We can look at some of the third party options out there and some that actually function as a bundle. But here, what I recommend is you go through just on your PC for your company and look through with Windows Defender, particularly that making sure, hey, is your firewall active? What's going on automatically set with your virus and threat protection. Now, if you deep dive into that, particularly in the advanced controls, you may notice that a few things are not set to the highest security as default. So you can tailor it how you so choose with this case. But it is one of those things that I do recommend if you're on the PC, having Windows Defender and let it do its job. It was designed to do that. Now, let's say you want to get into that case with a third party. Now, here's something that your computer may not already have built in, and that's the VPN, the virtual private network. I highly recommend this for when the data is being transmitted across the internet. Now, what are some of the good options out there? Well, if you've been on a YouTube video recently, you probably heard of NordVPN. They do a lot of sponsorships out there. Norton 360 acts as a bundle. It gives you the ability to protect against viruses, malware, etc., but also function as a VPN. Quite a few clients actually really enjoy doing that. When I'm dealing with, in this case, from the university side and SBDC, We operate off of Cisco. Cisco's got a strong reputation in that world of VPNs. In this case, some universities like using Pulse Secure. Now, I do have this other fellow out there, and he's in bright green, and that's Proton VPN. You may say, well, what is a no-cost option VPN out there? Some browsers will have a VPN built into that, but that's just only limited to that browser. You may say, well, hey, I don't really want to try something out. I'm going to go with a free VPN. If you read a lot of articles from tech experts, you will find that free VPNs kind of come with a catch sometimes. You don't know if they themselves have actually malware involved into it. So I was actually looking through one of those things with the Global Cyber Alliance, and I came across Proton VPN. They have a free option out there. And at first I was a little skeptical on it. I actually tried it out on my own Mac for that case. With a free version, it will link across multiple countries. With a free version, you don't have an option necessarily to choose the country. But I was reading through on the tech articles, and it had been tried out by a few professionals within that world of cybersecurity for VPNs as free options. And it was actually recommended as, yes, a good free VPN that was being secure. It was based out of Switzerland. So in that case, they had a higher focus on cybersecurity and privacy, particularly that of what's going on with your data in relation to government agencies, et cetera. But also, too, it wasn't riddled with malware and was actually giving you the protection that it was putting out there. Some of these will have free options in terms of trials, okay? So you can try out one if you so choose, but if you're looking for a paid option out there, these are some of the ones that act as the top contenders. Now, once again, things do change. You may find something that's not on here that you really like. That's great. But once again, I really stress always having that VPN connection. Like I said, here we use Cisco. We really enjoy it. On the personal side, I like using the Proton VPN on the personal side with my Mac, and those things do work pretty well. But once again, it's all about the budget and the comfort level that you so choose. But the important thing is having a VPN in place. Now, what about the rest of it in terms of antivirus and malware? There is a model that's never fully debuted to the public. It's still in the comment period. You can read about it. It's called the CMMC, Cyber Maturity Model Certification. DoD's put a real focus on it. It's in its second iteration. It's called 2.0. And one of the first levels is about basic cyber hygiene steps. There's 17. And some of that encourages in those steps to have real-time malware scanning and doing a deep scan each week in regards to viruses. So what are some of the options out there that you can have? Well, you see Norton 360 again, but you also see Bitdefender, you see Malwarebytes, you see GData, okay? The one thing I do want to stress is if you're on a Mac, I've talked to multiple cybersecurity experts, and I still have not gotten a strong consensus as to what's the best option out there. Because unlike the PC, it doesn't have that built-in Windows Defender. It'll protect you from going to a potentially fraudulent site. So it does have some levels of security, but guess what? People end up sometimes ignoring that and say, yeah, you know what? I'm still going to move forward. Well, that's not going to protect you in that case once a virus or other piece of malware infects your machine. But in that case, Norton 360 has seen a lot of coverage simply because it acts as a bundle. One of the cybersecurity teams that I talked to here in Aiken, they really like Bitdefender for the Macintosh. Some of the reviews seem to be a little bit mixed. So, it's trying it out and seeing what you think's the best fit. Okay. But if you'd like, you can go through each of these, see what they offer, what the pricing. What I just strongly encourage is at the bare minimum, if you're on a Windows, please have that Windows Defender fully customized and have it operational. And you can do those deep scans. You can do quick scans in the background. Every week, do a deep scan. See what's on that machine. That's just going to help you so much. And if you're on a Mac, consider looking at one of these options if you were going to operate your company off of said Mac. But once again, I just wanted to throw out some options that are available for this case. But I really want to stress this. The best form of Malice protection is you, okay? Training the human capital component, whether that's you personally or your employees. Most of the issues that occur with cybersecurity happen because somebody got bored at work and clicked the wrong thing. And it happens to us as human beings, okay? I've seen it in cases where companies will test a workforce to see, in this scenario, well, who's willing to click on something that's provided as a link? And so I have seen cases where half of workforces have actually clicked on a link. It's would have been fraudulent. It's not, it's a test, right? To see how people respond. And in this case, a 50% click rate would not be advantageous for that company. Why? Because if it was a real link and something was actually malicious in said link, that's not going to be good for the company. So once again, I stress this, be smart about it. Now, if you notice down here in the bottom left corner, I've got ABP. Well, your ad block in this case. Really, you should be looking at ABU, ad block ultimate. Okay. But at the bare minimum. Why? Because it keeps the ads off of there. I mean, shoot, you're even on, in this case, like with Gmail or Yahoo Mail, or just on various websites, these ads are going to pop up. And some of the ads may be linked to what you've been searching, right? So they may not be necessarily a bad thing. They may be annoying, but sometimes you can end up on a site where the links are not so great. Therefore, having something like ABP, which you can install on your browser, will mitigate a lot of that. Now, the reason I'm talking about like AdBlock Ultimate is that's one of the best ones I've seen in terms of actually removing all ads. If you get into the case of AdBlock Plus, you know, some platforms I've seen it completely remove the ads, others, some ads still get through. So you do need to consider, if you're going to use an ad block, how effective it is being for your browser. Once again, I stress, don't click on something simply out of boredom, okay? You want to hire the right people for your company so you know they're smart about it to begin with, but also too, things get spoofed, or simply somebody thinks, hey, you know, I got this link in an email. Just because you got that link, you need to be careful about it. So once again, I cannot stress that you are half the battle here, making sure you're not putting yourself and your company in a bad situation to begin with from cybersecurity. Now, what about the world of backups? Well, I treat backups from twofold purpose. Number one, because somebody malicious may infiltrate your system, hold your information hostage, and you got to start over from a backup. Number two, you accidentally delete something, or unfortunately your system gets corrupted by something that's not malicious, but unfortunately it goes down. Uh-oh, where are we going to pull the data from? So in terms of backup timing, Scott Bellows, who's one of my colleagues, he and I attended a cyber conference recently. We did a 3-hour exercise with a sample company that actually happened. And that company was unfortunately hit by ransom. And so initially they were like, hey, you know what? We're just going to pull from the backup. Well, it turns out that company had only been doing backups each month. So they were working with 30 days past. And then went further and turns out they hadn't really been testing their backups. And the backups ended up failing. And not to mention, third, here's a problem that gets quite scary. And I'm not doing this to make you necessarily afraid, but I want you to be aware that some cyber attacks have occurred where the infiltrator gets into your system and doesn't do anything. They just sit there. They watch what's going on and they wait for the perfect moment, or in this case, the worst moment for you when they decide to strike. So even if you have a backup in that case, if you're not testing your systems for the deep scan on that, and someone had gotten in, well, it turns out if you pull from a backup that you hadn't been properly testing to see, hey, you know, is this fully secure? Well, you may already be back to square one with a cyber attack. So unfortunately, those things do occur. So what are some of the best ways in terms of backupping? Well, going through a secure cloud platform, such as in this case, you know, like Dropbox or SharePoint, etc., right? It's having that information protected in a secure cloud where you can access it if you need to, but also too, that of an external hard drive. You know, like if you're on a Mac for that case, they've got Time Machine built in. It's actually storing essentially a capture of your system should you need to revert to it, okay? But just simply having your information put on a hard drive is also another way that can protect it, assuming that you encrypt said hard drive as well. That's key. So once again, going for 2 different forms of backups here and seeing how often that you back up them. Now, I mentioned the encryption portion. So this really depends on which operating system you're functioning. You are on Windows with a PC, you're looking at BitLocker. If you're on a Macintosh, you're looking at FileVault. Okay, they both are doing the same things. And what you can do anytime with a hard drive, depending on your operating system, is have it activated encryption. So that way the files that are on that hard drive are also further protection. This is just an example, a screenshot actually taken from my PC that I use for work. here, and it's showing BitLocker. Now, the nice thing is I didn't have to do any of this because we go through the university systems, and universities are quite serious about cybersecurity. So they do a lot of this built in for you. But you, on the other hand, may actually need to go through on your own PC and ensure that BitLocker is activated for that. Okay. Now, if you'll notice down there too, you can actually have the same thing for the data drives. Okay. But in this is just showing what's there. Now, if you notice, you can say back up your recovery key for this. Well, once again, anything dealing with encryption or passphrases, you want to make sure you do not lose your recovery key. Same thing with a Mac. File Vault, you can go through and activate that further. Unfortunately, I realized I did not have a screenshot of that, so I do apologize. But File Vault's going to be the same thing when you're going into the settings. In this case, you go into privacy and security. You're going to scroll down, and it'll say, do you want to turn on File Vault? It'll encrypt the files. But once again, you want to make sure you're not forgetting your passphrase, master password, and also, too, it'll give you a recovery key for that. Do not lose those, okay? So that is the one thing to stress with encryption. It's great from that purpose, but you want to make sure you're holding on to recovery keys. So depending on which operating system you're on, great. Activate encryption. Once again, not rocket science, but it is important nonetheless. Now, I mentioned the timing of the backup. So this is actually a screenshot of the self-audit worksheet that I showed you in the beginning. And this is coming from Earl's workbook that he had put together. And the nice thing about it is actually looks and sees what you're doing from the backups. I mentioned that story about the company, and yes, it was factual. They were only backing up on a monthly basis. Unfortunately, even if there was no cybersecurity component involved, that's why we talk about data protection as its own element, because part of it is cybersecurity. The other part is, guess what? He accidentally deleted something. Now you've actually got to redo the entire system for 30 days on that. So once again, it's looking at, all right, what's the frequency of the backup? Where's it stored at? Same thing noticing here with the user files, the file change, because you may end up having the same files, but you are, of course, adding new things to them. Perfect example in Excel workbook, in those cases. So you want to see what is the most important information that your company has, how often you're backing up and where you're backing up, and making sure those backups are encrypted. So all in all, that's what we see with the backup element. Now, last but not least, going here with the email protection element, and that is getting into your messages. Now, we could really have a deep dive here, getting into that case like with DNS. There's some things you can further set up with your machine going like with Quad 9. And if you ever wanted to go on that one-on-one, we could talk about it. But I wanted to just get around some of the basics, okay, of email protection. Number one is making sure that you approach it from an anti-phishing perspective. The worst thing that can occur is actually spoofing, where someone comes in, they're pretending that they are someone else. Worst case scenario, that actual email address is masked to impersonate that individual that you trust, okay? I've seen that occur sometimes. So you want to always be careful. I talked about multi-factor authentication. You see something weird come in, number one, do not click the links on it. Number two, just like how that platform calls your phone or sends you an email and says, hey, here's the code. Are you really you? Go contact the person who supposedly sent that message and say, hey, did you send this? Is this authentic? We've done that occasionally, being quite paranoid. Most of the time, it's like, hey, yeah, we did send that. We didn't want to freak you out. Okay, great. Other times I have seen it where I've contacted the individual at hand and they're like, no, that is not me. Please do not click on anything. Unfortunately, they had been spoofed in that scenario. If you're dealing with a system like Microsoft Outlook, you can establish your contacts on a safe sender list. Anytime I'm in Outlook, it'll tell me, hey, is this person a trusted sender? We're blocking portions of the message until you confirm this person can be trusted. But once again, with the hyperlinks, really verify that they are indeed. And sometimes, if you just want to have something simple, you can actually hover over a hyperlink and see where it's going at. Now, a lot of the systems have been trying to be pretty good about it. And they'll say, hey, even if you click the link, oh, this might actually be going to something fraudulent. Please don't proceed on that. But things still get through. And so you want to make sure that you are treating and being proactive about it from your email protection. I'm also providing another hyperlink in that case, like with Outlook, to how to encrypt your confidential messages. One of those things, if you are going to go through encryption, that's great. But you are going to make sure that, in this case, the recipient has a digital ID to actually make sure that they are the only ones being able to actually access this. because if it's going to someone else for that case, it's just going to show up as essentially a garbled form of data, which is what it's intended to do. Okay. But if you would like, you can actually encrypt your messages on those if they are dealing with sensitive information. Better yet, you may actually consider an alternative and actually say, should I email this file in the first place? A lot of times I'll hear some clients and they'll just be like, hey, you can, email tax returns. Please don't do that. People are like, hey, I'll password protect it and it's probably all good. Is that fully encrypted? Why are you emailing this to begin with? A lot of CPAs will tell you they don't want you dealing with that via email because that's sensitive information. It's got your social security number, not to mention your finances. Better yet, why not go through a secure portal? In that case, documents can be uploaded, they can be retrieved, they can have their own form of multi-factor authentication to ensure that this is you and only you are the one who is going to pull this file from that portal. So a lot of this gets around, once again, to common sense. I mean, if we wanted to actually go further into securing your email, we could have an own session on this. There's some other great tools that go along with this. What you'll actually find, if you ever want a great additional resource that shows you a lot of what we talked about, but in other forms, it's the Global Cyber Alliance, and they have their cybersecurity toolkit for small businesses. I recently found it, been sponsored by MasterCard for that case, and its focus is, and they try to update it routinely, is to look at these different elements that we've all discussed here, okay? And you can find a whole deep dive on further with email protection. But a lot of companies probably won't go to that extent. So I'm trying to look at it once again from a top level action. What are some great things that you can do that are already no cost and they're best practices that will act as safeguards? Because I told you, the individual, your employees, you're already half the battle, making sure you're not putting yourself in dangerous cyber situations. So, well, that said, I told you we get done a little earlier. And I will open up for questions, but I told you, this is just a top level action. I want to actually follow up with everybody who attends. So Carolyn's going to send out a survey regarding today's webinar, but also too, you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint. I'm going to contact you, probably work with your primary counselor as well, and seeing how that you were implementing these elements. Because once again, we know cybersecurity is kind of a bland topic, but that's why I'll go for this almost rebranding of data protection, because it goes further than cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is only one part of it. Unfortunately, files get corrupted. Operating systems have bugs. And unfortunately, you delete the wrong thing and permanently delete it, and you're like, uh-oh, we're in a bit of a problem here. Therefore, data protection just looks at it as a fundamental of any small business to get it right as the final piece of the startup checklist. And hopefully, that's what I've been able to do today. Normally, when I put up this, I'm encouraging, you to contact me anytime. But like I said, I'm going to reach out to everyone who's attended today and talk about further with your company in the capacity that you would like regarding cybersecurity and data protection. So with that said, let's look at the chat, see if we have any questions here. I think Michelle James had asked after the meeting, can you email everyone this link? Yes, and I certainly will. And I can actually bring that up further as well in terms of the self-audit worksheet. We have an entire page dedicated just to cybersecurity. And in this case, are you asking, I think it was Logan asked, are the automatic passphrases the browsers create considered non-secure? The passphrases themselves are actually pretty good in terms of the setup. It's the case of what if somebody gets into your browser? And this gets into the human component. This is something I don't think I've actually mentioned. If you're on a PC, you can actually hit the Windows button and it'll lock the screen. Because let's say you forgot to, and you're like, shoot, I got to actually go across the hall. Somebody already can hop in on that laptop. What happens if they get involved in just the browser? I was actually reading an article from cybersecurity team. One of the things they're not recommending so much for businesses using the browsers, because if the browser in that case becomes vulnerable, they can go through and see the passphrases involved. But the passphrases themselves that are generated by the browser, yeah, they're acting on those secure fundamentals. I mean, they're trying to have, in that case, probably 16 or more characters in it, using a mixture of upper lowercase numbers, etc. But it's one of those things where if the browser, unfortunately, was to be compromised, then yes, your passphrases are most likely going to be opened up to that bad actor. But once again, I'm stressing, there is no bulletproof armor here with cybersecurity. It's about to the extent that you feel comfortable with. and also too, what your budget can afford. You know, prior to this meeting, I think a couple of years ago, I actually did a video with several clients who had actually dealt with cybersecurity issues or other data protection. You know, and one of the things they did stress is, I think one guy had the famous quote of, free, when it comes to cybersecurity, free is not always the best option. But they all had the same commonalities, being proactive about this. Because unfortunately, you don't want it to happen to you. Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. You want to avoid that from happening with your company. But if I'm not mistaken, those are the only 2 questions we have. So if anybody else would like to ask a question here, please let me know, and I will answer it as well. Okay, I think Annette asks, I send emails with sensitive information to clients via emails. What is best way to send this information? Well, I mentioned like the case with a lot of CPAs, they've actually subscribed to a secure online portal in those cases. And what they'll have is the client actually log into that secure portal to pull information. I'm seeing that become a lot of standard practice with tax returns or other things that have things such as your social security number. That way you can pull from there. But in those cases, I mean, if you are going to send something via email, you know, one of those things I would recommend is actually encrypting that, but also to putting additional protections on that file. That's why we're suggesting there's probably a better alternative. It's like the world of insurance. Find a way to mitigate the risk. And a lot of these cases can do that. But unfortunately, like if I'm not mistaken, one of the companies like Dropbox, they had a breach in the past. I mean, inevitably, like I think LastPass had a data breach as well. Inevitably, it's going to occur to each business out there, but it's trying to find what are the best practices that you can use. I mean, like I said, I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I've had to do a lot of learning throughout this whole process. You know, I've tested quite a few things just on my own personal machine just to see how effective they are. I mean, there's so many things we could deep dive into further. I mean, if you want to actually talk about like managing, you know, your entire network, you know, there's like a great free tool called Thing that allows you to do that. But also too, if you know you're using something like a Netgear, it has the Blackhawk actual app that you can use on your phone or your iPad to actually manage further on those cases. You know, one of those things I would recommend, like further details of cybersecurity with your routers. In that case, reset the factory settings. And I would encourage your business to not use the built-in passphrases. Set your own. Okay. It's just going a next step. Unfortunately, in the world, like with AI, you know, there's so many bad actors that have just dedicated their entire machines to trying to hack and crack any kind of safeguard out there. So unfortunately, it's an ongoing battle, but one of those things you do want to consider nonetheless. Okay, I think we had a follow-up question. Does it mean like a password attached to it? If you are going to send a file that's, say, been password protected, I do not send the password or passphrase in an email. In that case, you know, if you wanted to, if you're going to go that route, I'd probably recommend calling the client ahead of time and saying, here's what actually the passphrase used to open up said file. It's one of those things, like I said, if you're going to do that, I'd probably go to that extent. You can use encryption on the email. Otherwise, look at a secure portal for it.